no actors were stipended as the same as samurai in the household, and they performed ritually. So no drama was not commercially performed for at least since the 14th century. That it was performances that we say there's a new shogun, they would have 3 or 4, 5 days of performances in the city celebrating that, or temples sometimes sponsored to raise money for that something or other. But it was considered an exclusive art. If you've been to Kyoto, you know that the Kinkakuji, which is the now World Heritage item, so it's terrible to get to because it's always so crowded. I don't think it's probably just COVID, but it usually is. Ashikaga Yoshimitsu also built this at the same time as that. We mentioned Seami Motokyo, who's an unbelievably amazing character. He lived a long life. He wrote lots of plays. He also wrote considerable treatises on, which I think are probably this early period, the 15th century, the most sophisticated writing on theater anywhere, including the West. One of the things that Japanese, I think, can claim, especially as performance traditions, is fantastic with no kabuki bunraku, living traditions that are so engaging in different ways. So the shogunal patronage took the no out of the popular world into the elite world, and it gave reality the opportunity then to look at all the classical stories and rewrite them, which is what theater normally does, is recreate them for the stage. Commoners did take lessons in the no, all the way up through the various periods, but as I said, they would only take it as an amateur hobby. This is one of the other things that's perhaps seems to be at least unique about Japanese theater is almost always the performers are teaching the art to amateurs. So today, and for a long time, no performers have ever made a living from the box office, even when it was commercial again in the late 19th century when things changed and opened up. It's always their income basically comes from teaching. Even the puppet theater, the chanters and shamisen players, half of their income usually come from teaching amateurs because it was so popular among people. It would be as if people who went to see opera actually spent a lifetime learning arias and actually being able to amateur had shows, recitals on that. So when you happen to go see a no play in Japan, 90 plus people in the audience have or are taking lessons in no drama. I'll pass these around afterwards, but they sit with, many of them sit with a book like this. This is Kurozuka, where they're sitting in the audience following the actors, because they've probably learned something, or at least they have learned well enough to know how to follow. You're always going to see, you do it's a Kurozuka and a Kyogen, but the fundamental traditional organization is, let's look at a node stage first. This is a stage, this is outdoors at Hongai Temple in Kyoto. Can't see too well there, but you can see the stones along the ground. That's what I was talking about, the sense that the stage is considered to be above water. And it's all those stages are the same, basically. And let me just show you one more ahead and go back to this. This is the modern stage, National Theater in Tokyo. At the back, all stages have this pine tree in the back. The pine tree is basically considered to be the Kasuga shrine pine tree where the gods dance. And so again, it's this religious history. This is where the actors come out from. They dress back here. Kagami in Japanese is a mirror. So the back wall is an entire great big mirror. So when the actors fully dress and has the mask on, they will sit there and contemplate themselves with the idea of becoming the character. And when they're ready, sometimes it takes a little while, the music will sort of draw them out. The flute especially, since the flute sort of draws out spirits, and then they come out. There's 3 pine trees. This is like a bridge again. Hashikakagi means a bridge from that world, the spirit world, and this temporary pure space remains same. The 3 pine trees. No mass. The eyes are really small, so you can't see very well. So it's very simple. You look at these pine trees, get where they are, and these pillars that signify that they're used to giving their present. So again, you have Shirasa, this is the stones around it. The chorus sits here, usually 8 performers. Most of the time, no, we do have women, but most of the performers are men. Sit sometimes in a play, one goes for 2 hours kneeling on wood with just kimono on. I saw younger sort of adolescent collapse because he just couldn't take it. Most of it obviously takes tremendous training to be able to practice to sit for 2 hours kneeling on wood. The musicians are here. We have a flute, 2 different kinds of drums. At the back, and there's a little door here that the musicians come in and out of. And you'll have someone who's an attendant assistant will fix things or fix the costumes. You sit at the back there. And all those pages are basically fundamentally exactly the same. So, as I said, the Tokugawa government made no drama into they call it shiki-gaku. It's religion, it's ritual art. And so it was used on official occasions. This is completely off the wall, but when I researched Japanese erotic art, the Shunga, which was the British Museum, one of the things that was fascinating was I found from doing this, a parody of 3 days of no performances, which would be having all this erotic sort of stuff. So making fun of the Tokugawa family is the way I interpret it, because this was something that was sacred in terms of ritual power. They only wanted to be able to show, especially the ascension of a new shogun. All this changed, obviously, when the Tokugawa government fell in 1868 and had gradually transformed into a modern constitutional government. And so the performers lost their patronage, and some of them cleverly then hooked in, especially with wealthy women who had time on their hands to begin to learn. They may have learned something, women may have done it, but basically the no-drama as amateurs was also part of the samurai education. So most of the larger daimyo families, if the daimyo was interested, if the lord was interested in it, everybody else did it because they wanted to get a good favor with them. So you have, obviously, martial arts is part of the training, but no-drama was fundamental to Japanese samurai education. And it was very good because a child, it taught them discipline in the sense of learning to dance when they're only 5 or 6 or 7 years old, but also taught them Japanese poetry, the basic story, the famous stories, the Tale of Genji, all these kind of classical films. So it was a fantastic educational tool. And this continued in the modern period, transferred into the elite world of the new aristocracy that came from the late 19th century. And so today, there's been periods when actors, avant-garde people wanted to learn about the no because it's good for physical techniques, for acting in general. But basically, it's people who do it as an amateur hobby. And this is what supports the continuation of the art. As a consequence, the no, when it was patronized by Tokugawa, everything was regularized. So they created 5 schools, 5 categories, all sort of sense of having everything as part of the ritual. And so there were traditional schools, but they regularized and added one kita, making five. So each one of these, when I showed you these, each one of these books has a different emblem on the cover. I'll pass it on later. These are all from different schools. So they have their own lineages. And they're sometimes slightly different, sometimes the text is different, but the music may be quite different. They also categorize the plays, and this is what's important. The God know, you start off with God, and these are auspicious plays, good gods. And it's also called Wakino. Waki means on the next to, on the side, because the traditional full program starts with sort of a deity Okina. This is then what follows. This is the sort of sacred beginning. And the warrior plays, we continue. Warrior Shura is one of the Buddhist realms of never-ending fighting. So if the warrior dies in battle, they can't help but wanting to avenge themselves. So they're stuck into a violent passion of wanting to get revenge. And so the warrior plays, there aren't so many, but they focus on a character who comes back and confronts, like in the story about Samori, he confronts his killer. And eventually, in this case, because of following the Buddhist, I think he forgives the killer. He drops the sword that he has, he's ready to strike and kill. So it's a character that's coming back. And obviously, in this case, having a violent death, it becomes the essence of the character's life. Everything revolves around this, because he's only like a 16-year-old boy who died in battle against an experienced, strong, older warrior. And that's the Shura play. So Shura is the realm, the Buddhist realm of never-ending fighting. And I think one of the fascinating things about to know is that the center of the full program are women plays. So women's voices are the core of the program, the actual, and it's considered the most intense part. How is that? Most, in tragedy traditions, it's violent, masculine worlds that occasionally have women as leading roles, but most time it's men as to do with violence. Or that kind of power. In this case, it's women's passion. So it's relatively positive, but in a Buddhist sense, too much obsessive passion, therefore, is destructive and also causes pain and suffering. These are the characters, again, in this case, are all spirits who passed away, but haven't been able to give up this passion, and therefore are stuck in a purgatorial kind of hellish world of suffering. They come back and confront again. I'll talk a bit in a minute, give some examples. And mad person, there's different, fourth category has a variety of different plays in it. And in many cases, it's also figures. One good example is Aoi Noe, a character from the tale of Genji, who is obsessively jealous of another. Aoi Noe, another one is obsessively jealous of Aoi Noe and actually kills her. Her spirit travels and kills her. So this play is a confrontation, and there's a revelation of this Rokujo no Miyasa Dokoro, this character's obsession of jealousy and destructive. And she turns into a demon in the play. And then the final category, characters that are demons, that take on human form, but are actually demons. And that's the Kurosuka play that's actually coming on 7:30 today. So you have different kinds. You have sometimes characters who turn into a demon because of their passion. Other times it's characters that are actually demons, taking human form, and then reveal the fact that they're actually demons. This is an image of one of the god plays, Takasago, the gods of Takasago and Sumiyoshi. Sumiyoshi is a major shrine in south of Osaka. And Takasago is no longer much of a shrine, but it's across the bay. And this is the story of this sort of idea of love between two figures that are far apart. One, and they also represent poetry tradition. So this is an auspicious play that talks about the poetic tradition in a positive sense, and also ideal love, even though the two people can't be together physically, they're together in some sense of the world is unified. This is an image of warrior play. One thing I wanted to mention too is that no costumes, because the patronage of the showmen and the other daimyo lords, the production of no costumes are unbelievably fantastic. Literally gold, silver. In fact, they were so sophisticated that when the tradition broke for a period of the late 19th century, they lost the technical ability to create these costumes. I met a person whose family dealt with these textiles in Kyoto, and he was in his group of working to recreate the costumes. They were so fantastic, the complex costumes. When I said about no performing publicly or privately, or in the sense of commercially or not commercially, a performance would only be one time. You wouldn't have a run. You do one day, and maybe someone will perform 7 times in a year. So these costumes, some of the costumes they use, they bring out from their collections, especially some daimyo families still have, the descendants actually still have these costumes that are borrowed and used again. So they're funding, they couldn't create any new ones from the late 19th century. So these costumes are still preserved. It's not, the costumes wear out. They have programs of 30 days or longer. They'll actually wear them out. But these costumes, many of them are preserved because they're only used occasionally, and they're taken care of extremely well. Now, the women play is sometimes called katsura because they wear a wig. Katsura is a wig. One of the most famous plays is Matsukaze. Matsukaze and Murasame, the sisters, who are simple fisher girls in the sense that they burn seawater to create brine, to create salt. And this courtier from the capital is Yukihira, is exiled for something he did in the capital to where they live on the coast. And the two sisters fall in love with this guy. Then he has to be sent away to another part of Japan. He leaves them a poem saying, if you want me to come again, I'll come. Then, of course, he dies. They die. And this is the story of her being left with being left with his hat, his robe that she puts on and wears, and goes into sort of a mad state of completely imagining that he's come to visit her. The sister says, no, you've gone nuts, you're not being rational. He's not here. She refuses that and says, no, you're wrong, he's here. We're together, we're one. It's a sense of it's actually this play that unusually, sort of physically, she imagines the power of homosexual, the power of being taken over from the head of her bed to the foot of her bed with some of the imagery that comes with it. The core thing is that she's willing to have this. The language is extremely difficult, and of course it's mumbled behind a mask, and so you can't really, even if you're really fully Japanese and really know the text, so you can't really hear it exactly. So it's a suggestion that has to be completed by the audience. So in that sense, it's really like postmodernism. Something has to be. You have to complete the art, the audience, and so it's very demanding. So in this particular performance, I still remember very clearly. No one clapped. It was like a sigh that we had all contributed. So it wasn't a sense of clapping for a performance on the stage, but it was a collective sigh, and we've been there and experienced it. this kind of intensity. So this is a sense of what's the core of I gave those 5 categories, the center of the day's performance, which is to me is fascinating. Partly actually probably now the Japanese single greatest classic, Taylor Genji, by a woman, is, as far as I know, the only tradition where the single most praised classical work is by a woman. We know in this general area, Arthur Whaley was one of the people who translated it. He lived around, worked at SOAS a bit, and lived in the Bloomsbury sort of area. And when the first book came out, Virginia Woolf reviewed it in 1925 or 6, I think it was. And I found it fascinating, this review, because it's like it was only the first book of 6 that would come out, and gets very intense in the sense of psychological of jealousy and anger, women's actual spirits leaving and killing other rivals. So she didn't get that far in the first book. It was almost as if Virginia Woolf was not really very happy. There was another tradition where a woman was at the center. Was my sort of interpretation of that. This means that women's voices are at the center, because of poets, and Taylor Genji especially, but there's many more women writers, especially in the early tradition. So that's the center of the program. And the fourth group is the ones in demons. Let me just talk about one other idea, and that is this sort of idea of Johaku, which is, and the Ha is actually in 3 parts. But it's a relatively simple structure that goes with the other things that we're talking about, where you start off with an ordered world with regular tempos and order. And Ha literally means, the character means to break apart. So you break things apart, the order, and lead to intensity and tragedy. And finally, the finished Q, it's the same in Japanese. Kyuko means an express train. You finish with a rapid conclusion. This is sort of a fundamental concept that comes from Asia, but somehow it's stuck in Japan, especially in performance streams. Now, one of the when I was in Japan for a period, I was able to teach at the university, and it was very nice because I could take students to go see a play. And one of the things that's very good to go see is one of these demon kind of plays, because there's lots of action, like Kurozuka. But this fundamental concept is its own role. Japanese have a very strong sense that